course, for a devotee, every day is Sravanam day. That's what our life is based on. That's what's giving us the inspiration. So we'll begin with reading from Srila Prabhupada. Guru Das had sent a letter to all ISKCON centers inviting devotees to attend the opening of the Krishna Balaram Mandir in Vrindavan. He had invited life members from Bombay and Calcutta and had reserved cars for them on the trains. Prabhupada also was inviting his disciples to come to Vrindavan for Janmashtami. Lecturing before hundreds of devotees in Los Angeles, he said, I invite all of you to come to Vrindavan to the opening of the Krishna Balaram Mandir. Prabhupada had also mailed invitations to the Guru brothers, and when one of them, Sridhar Maharaj of Navadvip, accepted the invitation, Srila Prabhupada replied, assuring him of comfortable accommodations, and suggesting the easiest way to travel from Calcutta to Vrindavan. Srila Prabhupada also told Sridhar Maharaj of his preaching. You will be glad to know that our books are selling very nicely. Last year we sold about 4 million books, and this year within 6 months we have completed last year's quota, and therefore we can reasonably expect to double the sale of last year. The only difficulty is that we are expanding worldwide organization, and it requires very active management to keep up the status quo. So by Krishna's grace, everything is going on nicely. Regarding preaching tour, it has become a little difficult for me because I have got the same heart to have, and still I am moving just to encourage these young boys and girls who are working on my behalf. On July 15th, only 10 days before Prabhupada's proposed arrival in Vrindavan, he wrote almost identical letters to his sannyasi disciples, inviting them to come and resolve the many personal matters and items of business that had been pending during his busy tour. I cordially invite you to attend our opening ceremony in Vrindavan because all of our sannyasis will be present there. You also come there as a regular sannyasi. That is my desire. When Karandar, the newly appointed GBC for India, began to express doubts everything would be ready in time, Prabhupada replied from Los Angeles, the festival must be gorgeously done, it should not be poor. If there is a scarcity of money, it will be supplied. There must be full prasadam for all the guests. You plan for that, I will supply the funds. Complete prasadam distribution must go on. Regarding the temple not being finished on time, that is your responsibility. What can I do? Although Srila Prabhupada had responded to Karandar forcefully, the note of uncertainty from his head manager in India disturbed him. He wrote to Surabi, who was in charge of the Vrindavan instruction, I am a little agitated in mind because Karandar's letter says that there may be some work to be done even during the time of our festival. We can continue with that tomorrow. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om
Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
From Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 5, Chapter 6, entitled The Activity of the World from Shukdev, text number 16,
I
I think that was one you gave you.
Yes, 616.
So this is not according to the regular schedule, but because this week is Sravanam week of increased hearing or increased impression upon the devotees to hear, specifically reading, then the next week's classes, morning and evening, will be dedicated towards that. So this verse, unless anybody knows the meter of it, which I don't.
It's prose, so there's no meter.
So how do you chant it?
Just go through. I don't know, well, you can break it up for response, but
So I'll just go through it then. Itihasma Sakalaveda Lokadeva Brahmana Gavam Paramagalor Bhagavata Vishabhakyasya Vishuddha Charitam Piritam Purusham Samasta Tushcharita Viranam Paramamaha Mangalayanam Idam Anushwadayo Pachitaya Shnu Paya Nushot Shunot Tyashravayati Vavahito Bhagavati Tasman Vasudeva Ekanto Bhaktir Anayor Api Samanuvartate. Okay, we'll just go straight to the translation. Shukadeva Goswami continued, Lord Rishabhdev is the master of all Vedic knowledge, human beings, demigods, cows, and Brahmins. I've already explained his pure transcendental activities, which will vanquish the sinful activities of all living entities. This narration of Lord Rishabhdev's pastimes is the reservoir of all auspicious things. Whoever attentively hears or speaks of them, following in the footsteps of the acharyas, will certainly attain unalloyed devotional service at the lotus feet of Lord Vasudeva, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Please repeat. Shukadeva Goswami continued.
Shukadeva Goswami continued.
Lord Rishabhdeva is the master of all Vedic knowledge.
Lord Rishabhadev is the master of all Vedic knowledge.
Human beings,
Demigods,
cows and Brahmins.
cows and Brahmins.
I've already explained his pure transcendental activities,
I have already explained his pure transcendental activities,
which will vanquish the sinful activities of all living entities.
which will vanquish the sinful activities of all living entities.
This narration of Lord Rishabhdeva's pastimes
This narration of Lord Rishabhadev's pastimes
is the reservoir of all auspicious things.
is the reservoir of all auspicious things.
Whoever attentively hears or speaks of them,
Whoever attentively hears or speaks of them,
following in the footsteps of the acharyas,
following in the footsteps of the acharyas,
will certainly attain unalloyed devotional service
will certainly attain Lord devotional service
at the lotus feet of Lord Vasudeva,
lotus feet of Lord Vasudeva,
Supreme Personality of Godhead.
the Supreme Personality of Godhead.
The teachings of Lord Rishabhdeva are for the people of all yugas, Satya Yuga, Treta Yuga, Dwapara Yuga, and especially Kali Yuga. These instructions are so powerful that even in this age of Kali, one can attain perfection simply by explaining the instructions, following in the footsteps of the acharyas, or listening to the instructions with great attention. If one does so, one can attain the platform of pure devotional service to Lord Vasudeva. The pastimes of the Supreme Personality of Godhead and his devotees are recorded in Srimad Bhagavatam, so that those who recite these pastimes and listen to them will become purified. Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya. As a matter of principle, devotees should read, speak, and hear Srimad Bhagavatam persistently 24 hours daily, if possible. That is the recommendation of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Kirtaniya Siddhahari. One should either chant the Hare Krishna Mahamantra or read Srimad Bhagavatam, and thereby try to understand the characteristics and instructions of the Supreme Lord, who appeared as Lord Rishabhdeva, Lord Kapila, and Lord Krishna. In this way, one can become fully aware of the transcendental nature of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. As stated in Bhagavad Gita, one who knows the transcendental nature of the Lord's birth and activities attains liberation from material bondage and returns to Godhead. Om Gyantamandasya Gyananjana Salakaya Chakshuntamyana Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Makam Kadavati Vachalam Bhagavaya Degaram Nirvipatamam Bande Shri Vindhyacharanam Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vasari Gaur Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Ram Hare Hare. Shukadeva Goswami continued, Lord Rishabhdeva is the master of all Vedic knowledge, human beings, demigods, cows, and Brahmins. I have already explained his pure transcendental activities, which will vanquish the sinful activities of all living entities. This narration of Lord Rishabhdeva's pastimes is a reservoir of all auspicious things. Whoever attentively hears or speaks of them, following the footsteps of the acharyas, will certainly attain unalloyed devotional service at the lotus feet of Lord Vasudeva, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Prabhupada quotes this, Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya. Nityam means continually. So we perform service by hearing of the Srimad Bhagavatam. The beginning of devotional service is from the point of Sravanam. Srila Prabhupada explains that in light of Sravanam, how can there be Kirtanam? So it comes first Sravanam, and then when we hear something, we can repeat it. And Srila Prabhupada, he on a number of occasions said his only qualification is that he didn't change anything, he simply repeated what he had heard from his spiritual master. So that's parampara, and that's how we connect with the parampara. And connecting with the parampara means connecting with Krishna, connecting with the spiritual world. And these books, they are our link to the spiritual world. Srila Prabhupada said that these pictures, they are windows to the spiritual world. I don't know about anyone else, but prior to joining the temple, I was not in a fit state to understand hardly a word of Prabhupada's books, but the pictures, they were so attractive that I was practically convinced that somehow I had to understand these books. And it's not just like somebody painted some pretty picture of some kind of fantasy world. I know that's quite nice, but actually the potency of the spiritual world is contained within these pictures. Prabhupada didn't use his words whimsically when he said that these pictures are windows to the spiritual world. And he meant that. And one becomes purified by touching these books, by looking at them, not to speak of reading them. Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya. So one's life becomes auspicious by reading these books. So just as the beginning of devotional service, these 9 processes begins with Sravanam, hearing. So that hearing means reading, and for reading it also means hearing. One time, I saw Prabhupada, and I was speaking, and I asked him about. At that time, I wasn't finding much time to read, but I was hearing lectures from Srila Prabhupada, and he said that Prabhupada told him that this hearing his recorded lectures was equal to reading, because it's both hearing the transcendental sound vibration, Shabda Brahma. Of course, Prabhupada put great effort into writing these books, so we shouldn't neglect to read them and just say, oh, it's okay, I'm just listening to lectures. That's good, we can do both. The books were purposefully written so that we would read them. When Prabhupada came to the West, the most important thing to him was the books which he brought. He personally took so much time to write these books, to publish them, to transport them, to distribute them. In India, for many years, he was doing this, starting with magazines straight through to doing Srimad Bhagavatam, Bhagavad Gita, etc. And we can see this is Prabhupada's great contribution to this world as the books which he wrote. And practically to his last breath, he was translating these books. He wanted that every word that he spoke was relevant to presenting these books. So to put such effort into that gives an indication of how important these books are. So therefore, when you see that pure devotee never likes to remain idle, we realize that despite the fact that Srila Prabhupada travelled around the world so many times, opened so many centres, farms, restaurants, initiated so many disciples, wrote so many letters, so many things. Despite that, he still wrote so many books, and every day he dedicated time to get up when no one was around to write these books so that we could understand Krishna consciousness. So I'd like to read a few quotes from Prabhupada's letters about the books, the importance of reading Srila Prabhupada's books. Therefore, I recommend you to read books more and more and try to understand the subject matter from different angles of vision, and be always discussing it with your brothers, even while you're working at the press. And when you're working and you cannot read, then listen to the tapes of my lectures and hear in that way. And never neglect to chant your 16 rounds of beads daily. Rise early without fail, follow regulative principles, and everything will come out very successfully. You can rest assured of that. So this hearing, continue hearing. So okay, we may have a certain amount of time for class in the morning, and a certain amount of time for some personal reading, and then a large part of our day is spent in doing service. But even while we're doing service, we can be hearing so many narrations of the Shastra. We can be hearing lectures, which Srila Prabhupada, our own spiritual masters, are speaking on Srila Prabhupada's books. So in this way, we're always keeping in touch with that Shabda Brahman, that transcendental sound vibration. And spiritual life begins with the association of devotees. That increases our faith. Without the association of devotees, then our spiritual life can't even start. And that association is through hearing, and that hearing takes place through reading and listening to discussions around these books. And the more we do that, then the safer we are from Maya. Just like in this coronavirus, we're keen to keep a safe distance. So we should try to be keen to keep a safe distance from the danger of Maya. More dangerous than the coronavirus is Maya. We think, oh, that's okay, but Maya won't do any harm. But if we think someone's coughing or sneezing or whatever too much, then we want to keep a distance. Or we think there's an area where there's some possibility of infection, then we think, well, let's keep a safe distance. So even more so with Maya, because Maya can keep us in the material world birth after birth. And as long as we have birth, there's so many different diseases we can get. So, read another nice quote. So this is interesting. From 1974, letter to Narahari Das. Although there may be some difficulties within our society, these things are not very important. What is important is that we simply fix our mind on Krishna's lotus feet. That is his instruction in Bhagavad Gita. So we associate with one another so that we can assist each other in hearing and chanting about Krishna. That is the purpose of our society. So everything we're doing is centered around that, is to assist each other to remember Krishna. This you will not find in a materialistic society, when all hearing and chanting is simply concerned with sense gratification. So our desire is Krishna, and we want to go back home, back to Godhead, where Krishna lives eternally. So you simply follow my instructions as I have given you, and surely your life will be a success. And another one. I hope you're finding the time to visit our Montreal temple frequently, and that you're finding our books interesting to read. By associating and rendering service to the Vaishnavas and hearing the philosophy of Bhagavad Gita, Srimad Bhagavatam, as well as chanting Hare Krishna, your life will become perfect. And another interesting letter. Now you should try to become strong in Krishna consciousness. First thing is to chant 16 rounds minimum on the beats, and it is best to do this in the association of others who also desire to progress in spiritual life. You should try to remain at one of our temples, that will help you. You should also read my books very carefully, and you should render service Tadvadi, Pranipatena, Pariprashnena Sevya. Service must be there. So you have to find out some service that you can render, then your progress will be very quick. So Srila Prabhupada was just mentioning earlier on in the Bhagavatam, we were discussing, from Chaitanya Charitamrita, Lord Chaitanya benedicted the Muslim governor with chanting of the holy name, and then on account of hearing the holy name, then his immediate thing was, what service can I do? And so similarly, the reading that inspires us to want to perform devotional service, because it's describing the devotional service of the Lord's eternal associates. So we're learning, this is training us up how to become eternal associates of the Lord. And then the service is the practical application of what we're trying to understand. And by continuing to read and discuss these books, then we will understand more and more about the nature of Krishna and his activities, and how this is not of the material world. And this understanding, as it increases, as we become purified, then this will qualify us for getting out of the material world. So that's how important these books are. They're going to help us understand the importance of our chanting, understand the importance of devotional service, and they'll inspire us to want to read more and to find the time to read more. So as Srila Prabhupada was talking about becoming strong, here he says, now you should try to become strong in Krishna consciousness. And two things he mentions is basically to chant and to read his books in the association of the devotees. We should do these two things. So whether we're physically associated with devotees or online associated with devotees or whatever, the association is there. In these modern technology nowadays, that allows us to associate with so many devotees that one couldn't do in the past. Just imagine if we had no such ability to transport ourselves from here to India, while there was no internet or telephone or anything like that. It might be that somehow or other the message got to the West, but then to find a sadhu, you'd have to travel by, many years ago, you'd have to travel by foot, thousands of miles, and then you'd probably never come back. But this Kali Yuga is actually considered the most fallen age, but also is considered the most auspicious age, because very quickly the living entities can be benefited. The printing press that's used, it can be used for so many different things, publishing forest upon forest of nonsense literatures, newspapers, which are just simply repeating the same bad news every day. People are not learning anything from it. It's just gossip, it's gramya kata. So forest, this urge to speak is the cause of the depletion of forests all over the world. Somebody wants to speak, somebody feels they want to say something, and in the name of truth, then they're depleting the resources and they're robbing the planet of its resources, wasting such resources, wasting their time, wasting other people's time. And the only thing which really is worth printing is Srila Prabhupada's books, these transcendental literatures. Nothing else is worth printing. Only anything which is related to improving our service to Krishna and to improving our Krishna consciousness, then that is worth reading. Anything else is simply a waste of very valuable time. So I've been asked to speak really about finding time to read. Now, my own personal experience is that sometimes you may get so busy that you don't find time to read, but that's a choice. Sometimes we may have very high demand upon us where we cannot, somehow or another, we cannot find the time to read. But that can only be sustainable for a short period of time. It shouldn't be the norm. But actually, even amongst busy times, we can find the time to read something every single day in life. And we should make it a point. If we don't take good habits, then simply we'll allow bad habits to take over. So good habits. So I remember one time, then I had decided that I wasn't getting enough reading. Typically, I don't know about anyone else, but typically I found that before I joined the temple, I was reading Prabhupada's books a lot, and as soon as I joined them, I hardly found time to read. And the very thing which inspired me to come was the thing which I no longer had time. And that's understandable because we're part of a movement, preaching movement. And if we don't, Prabhupada says, or Krishna says about Bhagavad Gita, that one cannot even maintain one's physical body without work. So we have to work, we can't just sit around reading and chanting all day. Srila Prabhupada said, if we do that immaturely, prematurely, then simply we'll think of sex life and money, how to make money, because our mind is not, our heart is not sufficiently purified. So therefore we have to engage our mind and senses so that we can purify. And these books are there to inspire us and encourage and to inform us, educate us as to the purpose of what we're doing. So sometime I decided that, well, the way my life was scheduled was such that I hardly found time to read, so I decided I would make the sacrifice. I wouldn't eat at night, and I would just read instead. And I decided also I want to read the whole Srimad Bhagavatam within the next year. So I had a Shastra bag, and those little Bhagavatams were actually a real godsend because they just fit nice into your bag. And I take it with me wherever I went, and if I was waiting for a few minutes, the book would come out, and you read another page, and read another verse. And occasionally, you'd find yourself waiting on someone for like some period of time, and you get a chance to read chapters upon chapters. And there was a time also I was travelling with one senior devotee, and I had to wait outside a room while there was some meeting going on, and the meeting went on all day, and I practically read a full volume. And you learn, the more you read, then the more proficient you become at reading. You learn to speed read. And even speed reading is not something where, if you do it properly, it's not that you don't take anything in. You actually increase your awareness and you take so much in. So there's different ways we can read Srila Prabhupada's books. We can read the same thing over and over and over, try to really get deep into it. There's no hard, just as there's no hard, fast rules of chanting, the same with reading. But the one rule is to do it, to actually do it. And my personal experience was that the more I read, the more I actually felt strong in spiritual life. So just like Srila Prabhupada was saying there, now it's time to become strong. So if our spiritual life is not strong, then our material desires will become strong. So the importance of hearing is there. It's like we're either watering the Bhakti Lata beach through the process of hearing, and through that hearing there will be chanting, we'll be able to remember Krishna. Sravanam Kirtanam Vishnu Smaranam. And the necessity for remembering Krishna is that at the time of death we remember Krishna. Ante Narayana Smriti. Ante means at the end, Narayana. Krishna, Smriti, remember. Yamanam Vaki Smaram Bhavam. That at the time of death, whatever we think of, that state we will attain. So we think of Narayana and that's where we go. So our lifetime, the time which we have, if we don't utilize it to cultivate remembering, then it's just like at school we think, well, I've got so long to go before the exam comes, and then all of a sudden realise the exam's the next day, and we haven't studied, we haven't been paying attention in class, and we just simply we prefer to just sleep or daydream or something like that, or doodle or whatever, some kind of distraction. Just let the mind take us on some other little journey, because we find that more comfortable than actually learning or listening. But then what happens is you think, oh no, I better cram it in. So you try to cram it in the night before, and you realise, oh, I've left it too late. Or sometimes you don't even bother, people become apathetic. what's the point? I'll pass it or I'll not pass it. Who cares? They might think like that, but then when they fail their exam, then time comes to go and get a job or take their education further, they don't have any marks, they don't have any certificates, then they fail the test, and it's going to make their life more difficult. So therefore, those who are into work when they're smart, then they realise education is something which will make life easier for them. And often we see that in poor countries, they put emphasis on education. In rich countries, they don't really care about it because they become lazy. They think, oh, we've got everything anyway. What's the harm if I don't succeed? I'll just go on the dole anyway. So this is Kali Yuga mentality. So similarly, our life as a devotee shouldn't be thinking, well, I'll just fool around and I should be okay to remember Krishna at the time of death. And thinking that what we've done is enough, that'll be okay. I've done this much, it'll be all right now. But that didn't work for Bharat Maharaj, did it? He was a great emperor, he gave everything up. He had much more to give up than we did, and he gave it all up, but yet still he got distracted and didn't remember Krishna at the time of death. So we can't take chances. We can't take chances of watering the weed and letting that grow and overshadow our Bhakti-Lata beach. So this watering the Bhakti-Lata beach begins with Sravanam hearing, and this hearing is what these Shastras are about. When we read Bhagavad Gita, we're reading what Arjuna heard from Krishna. When we read Srimad Bhagavatam, we're reading what Maharaj Parikshit heard from Sukadeva Goswami. So we're actually there in that position. If we put our position, Prabhupada says that unless one approaches Bhagavad Gita in the mood of Arjuna, then one is the greatest fool in trying to understand Bhagavad Gita. So what is that mood? Anybody know Bhagavad Gita, verse 2? Chapter 2, verse 7.
He asked to become Krishna's disciple. Soul surrender to you.
Top of the class. Very good. John was just quoting that verse there. It's Karpanya Dosho Bhata Svabhava Chamitram Dharma Samudachita Yoshvecham Brita Mesha Shastham Shadimam Prapanam. Now I'm confused about my duty and have lost all composure due to my zeal weakness. In this condition, I'm asking you to tell me for certain what is best for me. Now I'm your disciple and a soul surrendered unto you, please instruct me. So we approach Bhagavad Gita. Now we're basically saying to Krishna, I'm bewildered, I'm in this material world, I think I'm the enjoyer, I think I'm the controller, but I'm an illusion, and only you can dispel that illusion. So this is the mood to approach. And in the mood of Parikshit Maharaj, he was given 7 days, and in 7 days the curse would come, that he would have to leave his body. And he took that as a benediction. He thought, at least I know. Many people think we'll live for another 10, 20, 40, 50 years. But we don't know. It could be today, tomorrow. But he knew that he would be gone in 7 days. So therefore he immediately wanted to do, took the opportunity to hear. And therefore we have the same ability and the same facility to hear just as they did. So Srila Prabhupada also was referring to his book distributors, because sometimes the devotees would be so fired up about book distribution that they would allow themselves time to read. And that can apply to any other service too. I'm very glad that your distribution to libraries is well received. Please get our books, at least one full set in every city and college library in your neighbouring area. And if you read these lectures carefully, you will realize the topmost science of Krishna consciousness and be more inspired to spread the name to all persons as their real welfare benefit. So more inspired to spread the name. So Prabhupada also said that these books were simply there to help us to understand the importance of chanting Hare Krishna. And so it's not that, okay, I'm chanting Hare Krishna, I don't have to read the books now. But actually, these books are infinite, the wisdom is infinite, and the ability to cultivate our understanding of our eternal constitutional position. That is, by continuing to read that, we're continuing to cultivate that remembrance of our eternal relationship with Krishna. And then Krishna's pastimes are there to help us realize that this is what's going on in the spiritual world. This is what we can look forward to. Every day these wonderful pastimes are going on. Okay, and then he says, so you continue this book distribution program very nicely and at the same time take advantage of these books yourselves. Not that you distribute, not that you just distribute, but neglect reading yourself. Always read them, especially Krishna book. Every time you have a spare moment, you should read. This will help you to advance in Krishna consciousness and will give you the ability to convince others also. So every time you have a spare moment, and what better opportunity do we have than now? Because even if you think, oh well, I'm reading Chaitanya Charitamrita Adi 1, which is like probably the biggest of Prabhupada's books, it's huge. You might think, oh, I'm doing my back in carrying that around all day. You get a phone, you get a tablet. We find time to do some other things which are actually useless, isn't it? We find time to do things which are not going to help our eternal well-being. And we don't want to come to the end of our life and think, oh, I should have spent my time more wisely. No, we come to the end of our life and automatically we'll just be taking shelter of Krishna because that's what we've been putting into the mind the whole time. We've been contacting that transcendental sound vibration through chanting and through the reading and hearing and putting it into practice so that when we put it into practice that enriches our understanding even more. Regarding book distribution, our real mission is to deliver the world by preaching Krishna's message to others. But even higher realization, the highest realization is to save oneself. So this is regarding devotees. In the name of compassion, not actually looking after themselves. It's not wrong to be selfish in Krishna consciousness in this regard. We have to save ourselves first before we can save anyone else. And this is a service also. It's not being selfish. If it's considered selfish, then it's considered selfish in service to Krishna. And it's recommended. Okay, and then he also says, by reading my books carefully, you will become enthused to distribute them more and more in greater quantities. If you continue in this way, being very much determined to achieve success in this lifetime, following all the rules, chanting at least 16 rounds and reading my books, then all of your desires to advance in Krishna consciousness will be fulfilled, and you will surely attain spiritual perfection and be able to go back to Godhead. So absolutely no doubt about it. We simply read, chant, and if we're determined to achieve success, so sometimes people say, oh, it's not possible to go back home in one lifetime. And one of Srila Prabhupada's disciples says, then does that mean that Srila Prabhupada was wrong? He prefers to put faith in the words of Srila Prabhupada. Yes, it is possible to go back in one lifetime, and this is how we do it. So as we read more, we begin to understand more of the importance of it, and then we become more enthused, and then we will find time to read, and it will become more important to us than the other things which we find time for. Srila says, if you're looking for me, you'll find me in my books. So this reading Srila Prabhupada's books is actually associating with Srila Prabhupada, and this is how we become so strong. So the effects of this reading are that our understanding increases, we have better understanding, which benefits us and those who we're trying to share Krishna consciousness with, whether we're sharing it with other devotees or whether we're sharing it with non-devotees. Then the more we read, the better we become and distribute this knowledge, the better understanding we have, the better we can understand how to transmit this Krishna consciousness. And if we have a better understanding, then that improves to better chanting, and that better chanting, that in turn improves our understanding. So it's eternally feeding each other. So this regularly hearing Srimad Bhagavatam, Bhagavad Gita, etc., this cleanses the heart. By regular hearing of Srimad Bhagavatam, all that is inauspicious within the heart is gradually destroyed to nil, and loving devotional service is established, is re-established as an irrevocable fact. There's no going back. So sometimes, if a disciple becomes weak, the spiritual master may spend more time with them to strengthen the person up. So similarly, if we find ourselves weak in some way, then simply we read more, because that reading more is taking more association. And that association is when it's just like being with the spiritual master. So similarly, when we give out Prabhupada's books, then we're giving them association with Srila Prabhupada. And when we take that time to read Srila Prabhupada's books more and more, we're giving more importance to that. And Krishna within our heart will give the understanding, Tesham Sakatavi Mahanam, Bhatatam Purvakam, Dali Vidayogam Tamyenama Upayantate. So even personally speaking, when I first tried to read Prabhupada's books, couldn't understand anything, but because we kept on trying, then gradually the understanding comes. So just by making that endeavour, we become purified, and Krishna will give understanding. And so to increase our reading, which is what this week is all about, then that can be in different ways. It can increase our attention. So Prabhupada was mentioning many times there that we should carefully read his books. So what would that mean, to carefully read his books?
Not to fall asleep while reading?
Not to fall asleep, that's a good thing. Because attentive hearing, sometimes devotees may, with all good intention, get the book out and they try to read it, and then they end up using it as a pillow. Or we know one devotee, we were traveling Saint, I won't mention his name, and his reading consisted of opening the book, sometimes even 2 or 3 books, and just chatting, shooting the breeze with someone for half an hour and then closing the books. In fact, he'd open the book, probably got some benefit from it. Yeah, so hearing with rapt attention, this is being recommended, isn't it? So careful means that we actually have to be attentive. And sometimes it may be a struggle to be attentive in the beginning because we're carrying baggage from our previous life before we became a devotee. And this baggage is generally carrying the lower modes of material nature. Or sometimes we may have some, whatever other problem may be, but simply guarantee that by continuing to endeavour, then this baggage and these lower modes, or the grip which material energy has upon us, will become slackened, 100% guaranteed. The more we try to endeavour to hear attentively, then the more we will become attentive. It's also interesting to notice that even scientifically people were understanding that by reciting and hearing Sanskrit, then people's memory is increasing, it starts to nourish the brain in some way. So that simply by doing it, then we naturally will become more and more attentive as we become more and more purified. So at all costs, the main thing is just to continue the talk stream.
I'm just wondering if reading is the same as chanting.
If it's the same as chanting,
Yeah, it's the same thing. Because Rupa Goswami refers to careful. He says, Shri Krishna Namacharitani Siddhapi Vidya. He says, it is wonderful that even though you don't have a taste, be careful chanting his sweet names every day, which will most away within the thumb. So that's not seen as a reading, because if you keep reading, then eventually a relish will awaken. If it's careful reading, like you said, with rapt attention. And then I was wondering, when we're reading, we're hearing Srila Prabhupada speaking, so is that the same as chanting?
yeah. It is actually, and we just read that there, let's see if we can find it again. So Srila Prabhupada was talking about, see if we can find it. So he was saying basically the Lord Chaitanya was recommending Kirtaniya Sadhari, so this always hearing, always chanting. So this, anyway, the answer is yes. Yes. And it's over here that Srila Prabhupada was referring to Lord Chaitanya. Well, it's in the actual purport, isn't it? It's in the purport. Srila Prabhupada says that is a recommendation of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So Prabhupada is inspiring to say one should hear Srimad Bhagavatam consistently 24 hours daily. And it says Lord Chaitanya is recommending Kirtaniya Sadhari, one should either chant Hare Krishna Mahamantra or read Srimad Bhagavatam, and thereby try to understand the characteristics and instructions of the Supreme Lord.
One was chant or read Srimad Bhagavatam is the same. It's like either one as important to each other.
We've got to hear that first, like reading it in lecture instructions or this first, we've got to hear it first before we get the understanding.
Yeah, and that's why it says Sravanam Kirtan. Just like we have our Kirtan programs, we impress upon people to hear and chant, and that's why Kirtan is call and response, because if we don't hear, then how will we know what to sing? How will we know what to repeat? So, reading is hearing, it's also chanting, because when we're reading, we're receiving it, but it's also being recited within us as we're reading it. And our mind is becoming purified by that hearing and simultaneously chanting.
So a question leading on from that, Krishna says, if you become conscious of me, and then he also knew that we're supposed to remember Krishna. And I wonder if remembering Krishna is the same as being conscious, because Vaidyanatha Thakur says, Sravanam, Kirtan and Smaranam constitute the backbone of Bhakti. All volumes of Bhakti are included within these three. Amongst the three processes, Kirtanam is the most efficacious, because Sravanam and Smaranam can be practiced as parts of Kirtanam. So it's like you do all your reading, but it's only going to be of use if you remember it, if you're able to retain it. But that only happens as a certain level of purification, for it to stay on the heart, to be like a samskara.
So in that light, Kirtan Prabhupada also refers to reading in association with devotees. So we have japa, which is our personal sadhana, and we have a personal reading. But we also have kirtan. It's not that we have one or the other. They should be there. Prabhupada said that kirtan is the safest place in the universe. And similarly with group reading, when we meet together, we discuss these things, then the Lord is even more present. And therefore we're even in a safer environment, and we can inspire each other, and we can be inspired from hearing realizations of all sorts of devotees. It's not like only the older devotees can speak and everyone else has to listen. Even the youngest of devotees can have some realization which can inspire even older devotees. Prabhupada liked to hear his disciples preach as well, to test what are they hearing and what they're saying. What they're saying means that they're actually hearing, taking the message properly. And so therefore it's very important that we read in groups as well, and we chant in groups. Prabhupada was emphasizing that. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it's just thinking it's a progression from the chanting, because you may not be able to hear very well. Like the one boy I gave a book to, and he didn't understand it until he chanted. He chanted for 6 months, and then the same book he couldn't understand, he was able to understand. So Kirtana, for him, Sravanam couldn't take place until he performed, and then once he heard the book, Sravanam, then Sravanam could take, because there's no possibility of remembering something if you haven't heard it. So it's like the first level, just get the vibration up. Next level, process the vibration, and then third level, retain the vibration.
Yes, so the original thing was much just that's how we do it in our name, much just how to see, touch it, come on, and be, the Shoshisi Vinakshisi. So if you become conscious of me, you'll cross over all obstacles of conditional life by my grace, my prasada Tashisi. If, however, you do not act in such consciousness, but act through false ego, not hearing me, you'll be lost. So this becoming Krishna conscious means that we remember Krishna, and not that we remember just like we remembered something we did many years ago in our Rasa Lila, not just like a memory in the mind, but remembering means that we remember we are Krishna's eternal servant. So that's different from just thinking theoretically. Yes, I've read it with Krishna and Nityadas, Krishna Nityadas, Shakti, Veda, Kanch, not remembering simply in parrot fashion. And also the other aspect of the question was that it's not that we should read or chant, we can choose which one to do because either of them is purifying. Prabhupada says numerous times that hearing and chanting. But chanting means 16 runs minimum, and by reading his books, then one automatically comes to the platform of pure devotion service, just by continuing to do that. Automatically means following the process, just like Dana Gurmaharaj says that automatically we will advance in Krishna consciousness, but Krishna consciousness, not sloppy Krishna consciousness, but actually proper Krishna consciousness. So our level of hearing, if we're always putting an endeavour in, and our attentiveness to hearing and chanting, then sometimes it might be mechanical, like even sometimes to pronounce the words of the name properly, that might take some great endeavour. If we have some speech impediment, then that's another thing. It's not that the Lord will come at the time of death as Havi Wama, and you won't get the Lord there, or Krishna will come, not Krishna. Interesting as a factor, I was interested the first couple of days actually as a guest in the temple, and I was asking one devotee how to pronounce the name, and unbeknown to me that fact I had a speech impediment. So I was thinking, Krishna, is that how you pronounce it? But according to the books it's like this, and he was getting annoyed with me, and then later on I discovered that actually it was because he thought I was taking the mickey out of him. But I was actually sincerely trying to understand, if young people pronounce it differently. So even if we, due to some cultural thing, that we pronounce certain consonants in a certain way, and we don't pronounce it perfectly, Krishna will still be there for us. But we must try our best to pronounce all these names, these 16 names, make sure we're carefully doing that. Sometimes we have to just slow it down. There was one technique we used to do in chanting, which you can apply in reading as well, is that when you just start going around, chant like the first 1 or 2 or 3 mantras slowly and purposefully, because we can get into the habit of just rattling them out automatically. And if you take that time just to stop for a moment and people Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Do that a few times and then carry on with speed again. And similarly with our reading, we could be reading over something and then we could just stop and think, can I remember a single word that I just read? And then we go over it again and just keep on reading it till actually it starts to sink in. I personally also did the same thing with Srila Prabhupada's lectures, is that I'd get one lecture and I'd listen to it over and over and over. And then you practically remember the whole thing, and you never become bored with it, it just becomes deeper, and what you're doing is you're building a stronger and stronger foundation, so that teaching that Prabhupada's given becomes ingrained into your very being. And so just to show Prabhupada is, it's so enlivening when you hear Srila Prabhupada preaching, or you hear his writings, you think, wow, that's totally amazing. That my doubts have been eradicated, and even doubts I didn't know I had. He's addressing them and he's eradicating them. It's just like you go to the doctor and there's something wrong with you and you say, no, doctor, I've got this thing wrong with me. And say, that's okay, we can sort that out, but you also have this and this and this, and we can sort that as well. And then you go away a new person. So Prabhupada's books are like that. They will help us to understand where we're going wrong in this material world, and the various things which are causing us misery. He'll address those, and things which we're aware of, but he'll also address those things which we weren't even aware of, which are in our subconscious. Generally, we're aware of the things which is causing us the most problem at the time, but we don't realise that sometimes there's even deeper underlying causes. So reading Prabhupada's books unearths all these doubts and eradicates them. And this is what Krishna did in the Bhagavad Gita. So I'd just like to wrap it up here with Vrinda, do you have a question? Okay, there was something I'd just like to mention. Srila Prabhupada on eating Bhagavatam and eating, not at the same time. When a hungry man is given food to eat, or a hungry woman, they feel the satiation of hunger and the pleasure of dining simultaneously. Thus, they do not have to ask whether they have actually been fed. So at the time of, after feasting, serving, and taking prasadam, you don't have to think, oh, I just had prasadam now. Well, am I hungry? It just happens automatically. The crucial test of hearing Srimad Bhagavatam is that one should get positive enlightenment by such an act. So it happens simply by reading Srimad Bhagavatam, we get enlightened. And here's another one from the second canto, 8th chapter, text 5. Hearing and autumnal rains. One who is actually in the confidence of a pure devotee like Narada or Sukadeva Swami and is thus empowered by one spiritual master as Narada was by Brahmaji, can not only deliver himself from the clutches of Maya or illusion, but can deliver the whole world by his pure and empowered devotional strength. The comparison to the autumnal rain that falls on muddy reservoirs of water is very appropriate. During the rainy season, all the waters of the rivers become muddy. But in the month of July, August, autumn season, when there is a slight rainfall, the muddy waters of the rivers all over the world become at once clear. By addition of some chemical, a small reservoir of water, like that of a metropolitan waterworks tank, can be cleared. But such a tiny effort is not possible to clear up all the reservoirs of water like the rivers. So here he's basically saying that in the confidence of a pure devotee. So hearing from a pure devotee is actually the best way to hear. So when we're reading these books, we're hearing from a pure devotee. You might think, oh, it would have been amazing to have been in Naimisharanya, hearing from Sukadeva Goswami, or it would have been amazing to witness Bhagavad Gita, standing there with binoculars and a telescopic mic safely away from the battlefield. It would be amazing to have been Sanjaya, who had the vision to see that conversation. But here we are, we've got that, we've got access to these conversations, and they're there for us. Initially, it may appear to be there for them, but it was actually the Lord's arrangement so that countless living entities would hear these messages. So therefore, the Lord being present in these books is manifesting on these pages. So I'll give you a little story just to finish off with. So this is related to the Gita Mahatmya. This verse was by Sankaracharya, who many Mayavadis follow, and they think they follow anyway, and their conclusion is that it's all one and we should just merge. But this is what he says: Sarvapani Shado Gavo Dogavo Palanandana Partovaksa Sudhya Vokta Nugdam Gitamritam Mahat. All the Upanishads are like a cow, and the milker of the cow is Sri Krishna, the son of Nanda. Arjuna is the calf, the beautiful nectar of the Gita is the milk, and the fortunate devotees of fine theistic intellect are the drinkers and enjoyers of that milk. So they're just, maybe I didn't take a note of that one. Okay, so there are a few benefits actually by studying these. This is Gita Mahatmya, but of course it applies to any of these transcendental literatures as well. One who with a regulated mind recites this devotion, this Bhagavad Gita scripture, which is a bestower of all virtue, will attain to a holy abode such as Vaikuntha, the residence of Lord Vishnu, which is always free from the mundane qualities based on fear and lamentation. If one reads Bhagavad Gita very sincerely and with all seriousness, then by the grace of the Lord, the reactions of his past misdeeds will not act upon him. This is the Gita Mahatmya by Sankaracharya. One may cleanse himself daily by taking a bath in water, but if one takes a bath even once in the sake of Ganges water of Bhagavad Gita, for him the dirt of material life is altogether vanquished. So lifetimes of karmic reaction are vanquished simply by reading this Bhagavad Gita. Because Bhagavad Gita is spoken by the Supreme Personality of Godhead, one need not read any other Vedic literature. One need only attentively and regularly hear and read Bhagavad Gita. In the present age, people are so absorbed in mundane activities that it is not possible for them to read all the Vedic literatures. But this is not necessary. This one book, Bhagavad Gita, will suffice because it is the essence of all Vedic literatures, and especially because it is spoken by the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Okay, and we'll just finish with this. By drinking the Ganges waters of the Gita, the divine quintessence of the Mahabharata, emanating from the holy lotus mouth of Lord Vishnu, one will never take birth in the material world again. In other words, by devotionally reciting the Gita, the cycle of birth and death is terminated. Any last questions or points?
I just had one last care thing I'm going to say. It's 16 points to practice your understanding of one of the things that you said. And the very first one was there. Put to test and trial as well. Only those who attend the kirtan of the devotees can succeed.
Nice note.
I have just a little quote from Sheshika Prabhupada on the screen.
Wow. I don't have time. It's not time we lack, it's taste, and we only get a taste by taking time. Okay, so that's our mantra for this week. And interesting, we make the special, just like when we have a special appearance day, we make a special endeavour to hear about that particular form of the Lord. And we start to feel more connected with that form of the Lord. We cultivate a relationship with the Lord. So similarly, by making an endeavour in this practice, then that will stick with us too. Will create some momentum for increased engagement of the mind in hearing and chanting. ISKCON Education, Srila Prabhupada ki, Srimad Bhagavatam ki. Sravanam ki
Jai.
Jai.